The county governments only have the ability to levy taxes that are authorized specifically by the legislature. We're different than cities in that way. And so sales tax is really the only legal mechanism we have for generating any revenues to offset some of these HR1 impacts. And that's why it's a sales tax as opposed to some other type of tax measure.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special double release episode for both Only in San Jose and Only in Santa Clara County, your favorite civic ed podcast dedicated to demystifying and democratizing the process of civic participation in local government. My name is Ellina Yin, and I will be your host. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this special election double release episode. We are going to be covering Santa Clara County's 2025 Measure A, which is a response to HR1. If you haven't done so yet, check out the previous episode, episode 15, to learn more about HR1 and all the things for HR1. Okay, so we are back with Santa Clara County Executive James Williams, a position that he has held since July 2023. James began his career with the county in 2010 as a social justice and impact litigation fellow in the Office of the County Council. He is a first-generation American and the first person of color to lead the largest and most diverse county in Northern California. Now, before we get into it, I wanted to take a moment to clarify the different taxing powers between federal, state, and local governments. So, on a federal level, we have the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and the U.S. Treasury. So, jurisdiction wise, the federal government, through the IRS and the U.S. Department of Treasury, has exclusive authority over federal income taxes. We all pay those. And allocation-wise, most federal income tax revenues flow into the U.S. Treasury's general fund, managed by the Treasury Department, and Congress decides how these funds are spent through the federal budget process. Some portions go to a specific trust fund, like Social Security and Medicaid, which is what's being cut. And the local role, states and cities have no claim or authority over federal income tax revenue. Now, on a state level, California, speaking of California, the Franchise Tax Board and jurisdiction-wise, the Franchise Tax Board under the California Department of Finance administers state income taxes. We all pay that too. Allocation-wise, state income tax revenues go to the California General Fund, which is the state's primary budget account, and the governor and legislature allocates these funds each year through the state budget. And ballot propositions like Prop 13 require certain portions to be earmarked for specific uses, such as education, etc. Now, on a local level, counties and cities. Jurisdiction. In California, local governments cannot levy their own income tax. Only the state may do so. But, that is not true of all states. There are a handful of states, like New York State, that allows local governments to have income tax. And in New York State, only 2 cities actually do so. It's not all cities in New York State. So the 2 cities that do so are New York City and the city of Yonkers. Okay, back to California now. In California, local revenue comes primarily from property taxes, sales taxes, and fees. And Measure A is Santa Clara County's response to HR1. It's our county doing what it can with the powers it has. And here to explain that in detail is County Executive James Williams. So now we'll get into Measure A. Can you give us a quick intro for first-time listeners?
Sure. So, Measure A is an initiative that was placed on this November ballot, this upcoming special election ballot, by unanimous vote of the Board of Supervisors this August. And it's in direct response to the impacts that we've been talking about from HR 1. In order to place this item on the ballot, the board had to make certain findings that there was a fiscal emergency, and it's exactly the emergency that I'm talking about regarding HR 1, and in particular, the impacts from the devastating level of cuts from the Medicaid Medi-Cal program on our county and our health system. Measure A is a 5-year, 5/8 of a cent sales tax. It would generate, if approved by voters, about $330 million a year for the next 5 years. Now, that's, of course, just a fraction of the over $1 billion impact, and we can talk about that and our other strategies in a minute. But it's one piece of a broader set of strategies that we are trying to deploy to deal with the devastation brought to us by HR 1. The placement of Measure A on the ballot took advantage of the fact that we had an assessor special election that was already called for and scheduled. Now, it turns out the state later called a special election and added Prop 50 to the ballot, but that was not known at that time. And we've had a lot of questions. Why a sales tax? Why 5/8 of a cent? To put it in perspective, 5/8 of a cent is a little over, you know, 60 cents on $100 taxable goods. The county governments only have the ability to levy taxes that are authorized specifically by the legislature. We're different than cities in that way. And so sales tax is really the only legal mechanism we have for generating any revenues to offset some of these HR 1 impacts. And that's why it's a sales tax as opposed to some other type of tax measure. So that's kind of the origin of Measure A. We moved very quickly in response to HR 1. Like I said, it was passed in July 4th, HR 1. It's passed July 4th, and we're immediately seeing fiscal impacts to our county now. But this is one piece of that broader strategy.
Okay, so it is temporary, and a sales tax also only applies to certain items. Can you talk about what it does not apply to?
Sure. So sales taxes in California, they do not apply to services, period. So that means childcare, healthcare, education. Those kinds of things are not subject to sales tax. Sales taxes apply to goods, meaning tangible things you buy. And even there, under state law, there's a number of exemptions. Groceries, for example, are exempt. Baby diapers are exempt. Pharmaceuticals are exempt. So a number of essential and common household-related items, like food and medicine, are exempt from sales tax. And like I said earlier, it is really the only legal mechanism or tax that was available to the county. We don't have the ability to do an income tax. We don't have the ability to do a special type of property tax that would generate any operating revenues. So this was really the mechanism that we had available.
Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about because sometimes people get really confused. Like, I pay so much taxes. Why is this another tax? And I would love for folks to understand of at least the sales tax, like how much actually goes to a county. And I don't know if you want to touch on like income tax, like how much actually goes to a county, and that the majority of our taxes are divvied up in very complicated ways. But what cities and counties get is actually is not as much as people would think.
Yeah, so this lays it out. So, the current county sales tax rate here in Santa Clara County is 9.125%. But you see right here, right now, only 1/8 of a cent, 0.125% comes to the county. And that's different in different counties in the state. In Alameda County, right next door, 1.5% goes to the county government. In San Mateo County, also next door, half percent, so 0.5% goes to the county government. But here in Santa Clara County, that kind of local piece of the sales tax largely goes to VTA and Caltrain for public transportation. And so 1.75% is going to those purposes. And that I think is something that people get confused about. What we have all these different governmental entities that do different things and have different missions and different purposes. And as we talked about earlier, the county's mission and purpose is really these critical safety net services. It's healthcare, behavioral health, public safety services. And so here, right now, today, 1/8 of a cent comes to the county of these local levies and 1.75% for transit. In some cities, there's an additional city amount. So in San Jose, in Campbell, for example, there's an additional amount that goes to those cities. But these numbers here are the countywide rates that are levied across all of Santa Clara County. Um, there's a lot of complexities to funding streams. So property taxes, for example, that could be the subject of a whole separate show, but I think people pay the check right to the county because we administer the property tax system. And what I think people often don't realize is the overwhelming majority of that money actually goes to school entities between your school district, maybe high school district, community college district. That's their main funding source. And the county only keeps about 17, 18 cents on the dollar of the property taxes. So, and there's a share that goes to cities and there's a share that goes to special districts too. And likewise, income tax, the county doesn't directly receive income tax that goes to the state. And then the state does fund certain county related services with its general resources, some of which ultimately might come from income tax or from state sales tax, et cetera. But they're complicated funding streams, and there are very different types of services that are provided by different kinds of governmental entities, whether it's school districts, special districts, county, city, state, or the federal government.
Yeah, that is whenever I look into the numbers and see how it's divided, I become like really impressed. Like, wow, we have a really tight budget. We have like such a small percentage of all the taxes, yet we're one of the largest counties and we provide all of these services. And so when people like to say like irresponsible, government inefficiencies and all those things, um, and I look at this and I was like, "Oh, that's one narrative." But really, in reality, like, we're forced to be so efficient with what we have, the little that we
Yeah,
have.
and we have one of the smallest percentage shares of property tax of any county in California. So most Southern California counties, for example, I just said we get about 17 or 18% of that pie. In most other counties, it's more like a quarter of the pie. That's a very big difference. And and when people look at our overall budget, they see very big numbers. But as I just shared at the top of the program about our healthcare system, that $4.5 billion system, only 12% of that system is operating on local revenue. We have been very successful at drawing in external revenue. And so if you think about and look at our spending or our budget, you have to look at both sides of the ledger. You have to look at where are the revenue sources? And in the case of something like our health system, it's largely the services that we deliver and our ability to draw down reimbursement for those services, whether it's from commercial insurance providers or Medicare or Medi-Cal. That's funding the overwhelming majority of the operation. And there's so much that we do that we're only able to do because we've been able to draw in revenue, whether it's federal and state or charges for services or other things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, when I was doing the county assessor episode, and they shared that the valuation of all the real property in the county is like close to $750 billion,
Yeah.
and of that, the property tax is 1%, which is pretty wild when you think about that gap. And we have a sales tax at 9.12%. That property tax is 1% of that large number.
Yeah, and like I said, most of that, and that's of course, those were the changes that came from Prop 13, and there's some interesting long-term consequences that have resulted. So one thing that's happened, for example, over the decades with Proposition 13 is properties are reassessed to market value when there's a change in ownership, meaning when you sell and
Mhm.
a property.
Own it. Yeah.
Well, right, and that happens with some frequency for residential properties, for houses, but happens less frequent for commercial property. Uh, and um, and so over time, over the decades, as the decades have gone by, the percentage of property tax that is paid by residential compared to commercial, the residential share has grown and grown and grown over the years because of the change in ownership that happens there and the less frequent change in ownership that happens with a corporation. I mean, the reality is at the end of the day, individuals die, and there is going to be a change in ownership as a result of that. Corporations don't. And so, those are some of the interesting ripple effects over time from some of these policies that have been adopted, often at the ballot box.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And also, the whole point of this episode is to talk about the complexity of these tax measures and changes to our tax structure, because part of it is when we don't fully understand the ramifications of what we're voting for, we find out decades later. Yeah.
Yeah, and with Measure A, it's a 5-year measure,
Hmm.
but it really is about trying to give us a little breathing room to deal with this very substantial shift in the funding for our health system. And 330 million is of course nowhere near a billion. We're looking at actually over 1.3 billion by fiscal year 28, and um, we have a lot of gap to make up, even if Measure A passes. Most of that's going to be in the form of cuts. That means service reductions, service line changes, reorganizations that are going to be really painful and are going to affect people. But Measure A means the difference in having critical flexibility to preserve the most essential services. Um, and we're going to need help from the state too. The state's in no position to backfill this magnitude of federal cuts,
Hmm.
but here's um, some stats you might not know. Public hospitals are only 6% of the hospitals in the state of California, but public hospitals like ours run more than 50% of the trauma and burn centers and train more than 50% of the doctors in California. So these 6% of hospitals that are public are literally the backbone for healthcare for all Californians. And that's something that we think makes it essential for the state to uh, pay attention to the public systems and the fact that these systems like ours disproportionately rely on Medi-Cal funding for our operation and survival. So, we have a three-pronged strategy, one piece of which is pushing on the state for these public hospital revenue streams. One piece is very challenging but important work that we have to do to reorganize our services and service delivery, including a lot of sacrifice that our own public employees are going to feel. And like I said earlier, we're bringing forward an initial 200 million in budget solutions at mid-year this fiscal year. And then that third piece is seeking community support through Measure A.
And correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm seeing Measure A in this three-prong approach as in an attempt to save the essential services. And so this is the bare minimum of what the county can do with what it's able to do in the sales tax, because you were saying that there's only so many options that the county legally has in responding fiscally, and the tax is one of them. Like, for example, the county doesn't have, I think, jurisdiction over income tax, or like,
That's right.
that's not our realm. This is all we can do, so we're working with what we have.
That's exactly right. And, our tools are very limited.
Mhm.
And they've been constrained in some cases by constitutional amendments over the years, and in others by the legislature. But the tools that we have as a county government are limited, and we're trying to utilize every tool we can. Push every button, pull every lever. It's an all of organization effort to deal with this impact. This is the largest fiscal impact to our county organization since the passage of Prop 13, actually, largest impact in well over 40 years. And it is an all hands on deck effort to do everything that we can at the same time to try to bridge this gap and preserve these most critical services for the community.
Okay. So in terms of timeline, you said it's a 5-year tax, and so it would go into effect in 2026 and expire in 2031. And would it just expire, or what happens in 2031?
That's right. So it would, the way sales taxes work is they begin in the following quarter, and so it would begin April 1, if passed, to begin April 1 of 2026, which is really critical timing for us because that means it can make a difference for this upcoming budget where we're facing over a $500 million impact from HR 1. And that impact escalates the year after that. It gives us 5 years. It allows us to see how things evolve at the federal level. Hospitals across the country are going to have major impacts. There's already been a few in California that have announced that they're closing as a result of HR 1. And so I do believe personally that on that time horizon, the federal government's going to need to do something. Now, whether it does anything that will take care of our challenges, I don't know. So one of the things that happened in HR 1 is to help get the bill passed. There were a number of red state senators that were really worried about the impact on rural hospitals. And so they created a special fund to help offset some of the hospital cuts in HR 1, but only for those hospitals. So we're not eligible for that. And it's a temporary fund. So something will have to be revisited at the federal level. But beyond that, it gives us some time to pivot our operations and be able to assess and be in a position to see what we need to do. So I don't know what's going to happen. Candidly, we don't know what next shoe is going to drop from the federal government, right? What next, version of HR 1 might come our way. It's a new thing every day. But we're focused on trying to do everything that we can to preserve the most critical services for our community.
Alrighty, folks, and that is a wrap. And remember, the special election is November 4th. Make sure you are registered and head to the polls or fill out your mail in ballot and make sure that you exercise your choice and vote on the upcoming election on Measure A and on the county assessor and on Prop 50. Those are the three things. And depending on which district you live in, there's also, I believe, a school board district tax, but unfortunately, we do not have time to cover that. And without further ado, if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like, a follow, a comment, a review. It really, really does help. And if you have it within your means, consider making a donation. Thank you so much, and until next time.